great question. Great opener. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your show. I think this is awesome how we can connect through social media. Never met in person before. So
yes.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Thank you for having me here. So what led into this? In the short answer, a lot of personal pain and a lot of good support. You know, I think I don't think at the time I realized what I was getting, but people who truly are in the helping field and dedicate their life to service and helping other people overcome personal pain, to me is just so incredible. So it actually all started when I got sober at the age of 21. And I really was left pretty bankrupt, you know, physically, spiritually, emotionally. And I had to rebuild from there. So I was like, okay, what are you going to do with your life? I knew how to bartend. That was about it. So I first got a job at a coffee shop. That was the closest thing to being a barista that I could imagine. And then
amazing.
Starbucks.
Which coffee shop was it?
Honestly, it was my favorite job.
Nice.
I still reflect on that job. It gave me a sense of purpose, and it gave me that routine just to build from at such a young age. They asked me to be manager in such a short amount of time. And it was really, cool. I had a really, really nice, I had a really nice boss at the time. And it was, I think about that job a lot. It was very foundational for me. And I really had to start small. I had to go back and get a high school diploma, which I didn't have. And then I applied to Concordia as a mature student since I had never gone to CEGEP. So if you're 21 and over, then you can apply, do some credits and see how your grades are. And then I'm thinking, oh my gosh, first of all, I was shocked that they let me in. And then I was there and I was like, okay, what are you going to do now? And I love talking. I love communicating. I love people. So it kind of, I don't think I necessarily knew at the beginning what this would all turn into now. But as I went along, I think I was just trying to just one step at a time, just graduate university. I couldn't believe I was doing. And then it just continued. But one of the biggest, things that helped me get into this profession was working at a treatment center, actually working at the same treatment center that I went through. So it was a rehabilitation center, and I ended up working at kind of like the front desk office, just doing like triage and checking people in and going through their luggage. And then, you know, little by slowly, I was asked to do maybe like a small women's group, or I also got to sit in on a lot of group therapy from a lot of talented therapists. There was a sex therapist there at the time. There was drug and alcohol counselors, and it was really kind of rough and tumble too. So nothing was held back. So I really got to see it all. And that's basically really what kickstarted my career into addiction, and then what it's morphed into. It's a lot more process addiction focused now, which is my true passion. But yeah, it was a good almost 10 years in a drug and alcohol facility. Yeah.
Okay. So other than sitting in on the therapeutic sessions, did therapy help you throughout your recovery?
Yeah, definitely. So I actually didn't seek a lot of outside therapy for a while. So I'm a part of a recovery community full of other sober people. So I was getting a lot of what I needed there at the time. A lot of community support, fellowship. They have a program that they go through to allow you to kind of start to be honest about some of the things that happened in the past, and basically like an inside house cleaning. So I got really busy doing stuff like that. But yes, at the time, the therapists that were in the treatment center, I actually remember this one woman. She was incredible. She's in New York now, and she's one of the frontline people for like crisis and trauma interventions. She was brilliant. She was super patient. I still think about her. She was really impactful at the time. And then I started to seek outside therapy when I realized again, going back to my point of process addictions, I really thought drugs and alcohol were my problem. And it took me about 8 years to realize those are my solutions. There might be some other issues there. And that's really when I did a deep dive into exploring some of those other issues. Yeah.
Okay. So you're clearly very open about your sobriety. So I wanted to ask just a few more specific questions. So at what point did you realize that this was a problem for you? Because I think media really paints a very specific picture of an addict. And my belief is that it's something that's far more common than we think. And I think it's really important to talk about the backstory and, you know, life events or trauma that led someone to that. And I was just curious, like how substances became a comfort for you and how you, at what point you noticed it and had that motivation to come out of it.
I don't know if it was ever motivation. It was more desperation to come out of it. But actually, interestingly enough, my first addiction was food. So that's really where I saw myself becoming, you know, people ask me this question all the time. Am I addicted? What does addiction look like? And there's markers, right? There's markers that you can pay attention to. So I grew up in a household, a very healthy household. So my brother and father are both professional athletes. My mother is tall, beautiful, very thin naturally, can kind of eat whatever she wants, never paid much attention to anything. And then I started to realize at about the age of 10, I started to put on weight, and I would buy boxes of cookies that I wasn't allowed to eat. There wasn't any soda or anything like that in the home. And I would hide them. I would hide them in the cupboard. And that I still remember the effect produced by the sugar. It was that kind of warm hug. I was always very uncomfortable. I never looked uncomfortable on the outside, but inside I felt quite uncomfortable, quite nervous, very fearful as a kid. Did not feel that kind of safety at home. And food can still, I have to be very careful up until today, can be that warm hug when I need it. Yeah. Okay. So that was really the beginning of it. I was put into a private all-girls academy, which was very strict for high school. So there wasn't a lot of messing around then. But then in grade 9, I begged my mom to put me into a public school and kind of promised her that all my grades would stay up and everything would be great. Yeah. And then it was literally like a Jekyll and Hyde within 6 months, smoking cigarettes, smoking pot, drinking 40s in the park, you know, the good old days, but all very innocent and, you know, what I thought was just kind of adolescent teenage hormones, you know, running wild. But
which high school was it that you went to?
Yeah, this was...
Okay, yeah. My sister went there and there was like,
The Rock.
She always talked about The Rock, and that's where everybody went to smoke cigarettes.
I was just talking about that on Saturday, The Rock. And The Rock was amazing, right? When I first arrived, it was like, oh my gosh, look at these cool kids. And you could wear there was no uniform. Nobody cared if you went to class or not. Not to knock BHS, I'm sure things have improved by now. But you could get away with a lot back then. And it was exciting. It was exciting. I really, I loved to make friends with kind of older people, and all the grade 11ers took me under their wing, and it all just felt very, a lot more exciting than what I was used to. But very quickly did I notice, and this is one of the markers that I would have people pay attention to, is that the interest for other things dropped very quickly. So kind of why go to class when I could sit in the park and smoke pot? Why stay home on the weekends or play soccer when I could go get drunk with my friends? It quickly replaced all of the healthier activities that was going on, and it escalated very quickly for me. Yeah, very, very, very quickly. I just loved to be... I think one of the biggest things is when you're not feeling quite comfortable inside, once you give a person like that any type of substance, doesn't really matter whether it's overspending, gambling, sex, drugs, food, it all feels quite comforting at the time. So mine just happened to be the drugs and the alcohol. Yeah.
I guess that's a good segue to my next question. You mentioned markers, and I imagine that it's hard to know what those are unless you do some investigating, because when you look around at the marketing behind alcohol, it's just every single social event is better with alcohol, and it's like, it's classy. There's nothing negative associated to drinking alcohol. Yet I saw this TikTok once, and it was like, if somebody's not drinking at a party, it's weird, and people talk and like, that person's boring, they're lame, like what's wrong with them? But let's say like somebody were to show up at a party with like, obviously this is extreme, but with like heroin, people would be like, oh my God, like what are you doing? Like this is, and obviously that's extreme and way more addictive, but that contrast where it was like, these are both technically drugs. They enhance a state. They can be very addictive, but the marketing behind alcohol is so incredible. It's like every milestone needs to be celebrated with alcohol. Yeah. Dinner is better. Like dinner that you have every night is better with alcohol, and all the memes and all these like funny reels and TikToks you see about alcohol. It's like these people that are like, oh, I finally got my life together. And it's like, just kidding. I'm going to party and drink into oblivion for another year. Like it's, they're showing all the videos of, and in my experience, those down points are just probably the times where I had the most shame and I didn't feel the most like myself. But then you go online and it validates all those crazy nights that you had. And you just try to laugh it off, even if you don't feel great about it the next day. So anyways, big, long story to kind of ask you, what are some markers? How do you know when you have a problem, or, I guess just any markers other than what you mentioned?
Well, you're absolutely right with the marketing. And that was a great, kind of comparison. It's true. If you showed up with a bag of heroin, people would be like, are you okay? I don't want to share that. What's going on? Right. But I remember when, somebody used the term social lubricant to talk about alcohol. And that was a perfect way of explaining it, because even if you think about things like dating, right? You go on a first date, right?
Oh my God. This is awful, but I used to take a shot before a first date. Yeah. Sometimes
two. For sure. I'm sure if you, it's so nerve wracking, right? But exactly like you said, where is that invisible line between a shot or two to kind of relax the nerves, sharing a bottle of wine with girlfriends or your guy friends, whatever it is, to where is that marker? So for me, I'll talk about personal experience first. The drugs were my marker. So oftentimes when you see, I'll speak for my observations thus far, when I see people hitting a bottom, so what we would call like an emotional or physical bottom. So a physical bottom can look like maybe a DUI, crashing the car, getting stopped by the police, embarrassing family at a wedding. So these types of things. So when there is a co-occurring issue, say drugs, for example, you're drinking and doing cocaine, oftentimes because of so many factors, it's very expensive. You might be doing a lot more outrageous things than you would be just drinking. So people tend to hit a bottom quicker with the drugs, and also drugs are quite noticeable. So say you're married and your partner develops a cocaine addiction, might be a little bit harder to hide than some alcohol abuse. So drugs were definitely my marker, because what happens too is that you need to be able to afford the drugs. And a lot of people don't understand. I mean, a cocaine habit can cost you $400 to $800 a day. So where are you going to get that type of money? It's not like, I don't know, a lot of people who have these amazing, successful career jobs and are doing that amount of cocaine too. So usually comes with bartending and whatever it is, or maybe a sales position, or some people just have access to a lot of money, which is highly dangerous as well. But if we were to just look at alcohol, some of the markers, I truly believe everybody starts to notice around you before the person. The person struggling with the addiction is normally the last to know. Because what happens is if you want to protect something, you're going to justify it in your mind. You know, falling down wasn't that bad. Everybody falls down. You know, so what? I hit the curb. It's a tiny little scratch. It doesn't matter. Right. So I think a lot of the justifications start to come up. One marker is kind of taking money, right? So say there's a joint account and then all of a sudden it's like, why are there so many kind of extra trips or $300, you know, withdrawals every couple of days? So that can be a marker. Right. And then emotionally, right? Like a lot of people think that alcohol and pot, I mean, pot is so readily accessible now. They think that it's actually going to help depression when it doesn't. It's like throwing gas on a fire. It actually increases your depression and anxiety. The tricky thing is that in the moment you feel like it's lessening it, but it's actually making it worse.
Part of the concept of this podcast is that the wellness world I find can be toxic a lot of the time. And I really find that with weed, because like in my surroundings, I know people with like severe mental illness or like patients, you know, people that I've gotten to know, where it's weed has created a psychosis, weed has done something. And so when I see the wellness world that's saying that it's like, it's like seems to be literally the cure for everything, pain, depression, anxiety. It's just like, and it's again, marketing in a way that it's so natural. So it must be good for you. But there are several things out there that are highly toxic for you that are produced from the earth. Like, anyways,
no, I love
just
it.
Sidebar. But just the wellness world is totally hopping on to that. And I don't.
And I love that you stated that the wellness world in itself is highly toxic, because it is true, right? If only everybody could be taking CBD oil and meditating and doing yoga. First of all, it's coming from a place of high privilege, and it's stating that if you join this type of community, then you will be okay, right? And yeah, so which is toxic in itself.
And it's preying on the vulnerable, the people that are looking things up to get better now, like, because I've been in that place where you're just like, I want to read every self-help, I need to get out of this, and then it's like, you have these wellness coaches that are like, oh, well, hire me for a price far more than an actual psychotherapist because I know best. And like all of my methods work, you know, it's just,
I'll help you become your best self. Which means you're not your best self now, which means you're not okay now, you know? So yeah, we definitely have to be very careful of the language that we use, and why I love doing these podcasts and talking about these things, and included on my own podcast, I interview lots of people, and I'm always open to hearing what works. If pot works for you, great. Go smoke your pot, you know? But if we really want to talk about the kind of the science behind it, all the research behind it, there's a lot to be said. You know, the same thing when we get into food addiction. Some people completely stay off sugar. Some people preach moderation. So I really tell people, I mean, not an addiction treatment, not to smoke, obviously not to smoke pot, but yeah, it's interesting. And there's a lot of confusing information, contradicting information, whereas one person will say this, like CBD, a lot of people don't realize that if you're on an antidepressant, you actually can't mix the two of them. And nobody talks about that. Doctors don't talk about it. So it is really time that we start to kind of level up a little bit. But yes, in your original question, about wellness as a whole, I can't remember where we were originally.
You were actually talking about substances like weed and alcohol, and you're talking about markers.
Right,
I don't know
very
if that
far away
brings
from
you back to your train of thought.
Which can happen with me, so bring me back. So say we were to just focus on alcohol. I mean, an easy marker, right, is starting to come home later. Oh, I have this. Oh, I'm staying out. Oh, I'm staying out with the girls a little bit later, you know? And again, and I always ask individuals the same question, you know, A, what have you given up, right? Have you stopped doing things that you previously enjoyed or that brought you joy to replace it with this? That's a good one, right? You know, I stopped going to my Zumba class or whatever it is, or camping.
Because I woke up hungover.
Camping with the boys. I see a lot. I think people experience markers a lot with children, right? All of a sudden they realize they don't have the energy to play with their kids in the morning. And I see that really producing a lot of shame. That one kind of shakes them up a lot more than, that one's a tough one, because any kid under 10 or 5, I mean, you're running around and, you know, we all know how it feels to be hungover. So that's a pretty big marker as well. But I would say if you're kind of wondering, you know, when does it go? Basically, there's 3 types of drinkers that have been explained to me in the past, where there is a moderate drinker. So a moderate drinker could be one of my buddies that goes out like religiously Friday, Saturday night, and they get a little wasted. They have fun. They have a headache the next day, and they're solid. That's what they do. That would, to me, would be a moderate drinker. And then you move into a heavier drinker, right? All of a sudden you're coming home, I'm going to pour a whiskey, I'm going to pour 2 whiskeys, right? And then we're looking at maybe daily drinking, but not out of control. The difference with those 2 drinkers, how it's been explained to me, is that with sufficient reason, say your spouse is mad or your child is super disappointed, the person would stop. Then when you kind of cross that invisible bridge into alcoholism or alcoholic tendencies, what starts to happen is even these losses, say someone leaving, breakup, divorce, remortgaging the house, separation, children leaving, these large markers aren't stopping the person from drinking.
Okay.
And that's where I see you've kind of crossed into addiction, because when we are in our right minds, those would be pretty devastating, those losses, right? But now I truly believe that there's something physically different happening. And a lot of people have talked about this. They say, no, can't be, this and that, but it's interesting, right? There's no stopping some people. There's no off switch for people once they start. Yeah.
Okay. I guess I was going to ask you another question, was just, and maybe this is outside your realm and goes more into like neuroscience, but clearly you're educated on the matter. Is there a difference between the brain of an addict versus the brain of a non-addict? Like, do they experience substances differently, and like how do they differ?
So I wouldn't be able to answer once they're on the substance. I'm sure they're lighting up quite differently, but what I have researched in the past and have been taught is that it's actually a difference in serotonin levels. So they're saying that people with lower serotonin levels, right? So say I have lower serotonin levels than you do, you might feel a little bit more stable and happy just being you. Whereas myself, if I'm lacking that dopamine, I'm now searching for more dopamine. So I think as we get more progressive, those are the studies that I'm starting to see come out. Whereas people are prone, there might be clinical depression in the family. There could be mental illness, bipolar, borderline personality disorder. And what happens is that ADHD is a perfect example. Untreated ADHD, right? You are going to be seeking comfort. You are going to want that self-soothing, right? And it just looks like out of control behavior to a lot of people, but it's devastating. A lot of people aren't assessed properly. They're not assessed as children, or they're put on really strong medications, which you can get highly addicted to. I've watched people being devastatingly addicted to Adderall, well into...
I know a lot of people without ADHD.
Yeah, exactly.
Take a lot of Adderall,
so acting as kind of a speed marker inside your body. But yes, I would say the biggest difference that I have seen are people who are either prone to depression, anxiety, have suffered trauma, abuse, neglect. The drugs are going to feel a lot better than to somebody who right, naturally feels pretty. I mean, I have friends that they're like, why would I ever want to do cocaine? And I'm like, why not?
Yeah.
It's two very different people, two very different experiences. So that would probably be my best answer for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that's exactly what I was looking for. So if somebody listening is questioning their behavior, if their behavior may be an addiction and is feeling motivated to change, what would you suggest their first steps be? And what kind of resources are there for addicts in general?
So I think the first sign is that you're starting to ask, are there signs? It's like when you have to start asking if this is the right relationship for you. I always tell people, you're getting close to it not being the right relationship for you. So I always encourage people to really trust your gut, trust your intuition. But catch-22, that's very difficult to do when you're under the influence of something.
Right.
The biggest thing is to get somebody on your side. I often tell people, just tell on yourself, right? So that's why therapy is so helpful for a lot of people, to have that one unbiased person that doesn't know anything about you, doesn't know your family, doesn't know your partner, where you can just go and be honest. But at the same time, there's still, like you mentioned before, there's so much stigma attached to alcoholism and drug addiction still today, which is insane. So a lot of people are scared to go and talk to someone, especially if they have children, they have family, they have a career. They're scared that they're going to lose some of these things if they start to be honest. Therapy, even a coach, just somebody that you can start to roll some ideas around, because there's a power in getting your thoughts out of your mind, right? Because if you're anybody like me, I can justify anything. It sounds it's brilliant in my mind. I've crafted the perfect solution, and then I say it out loud to someone and they're like, Jess, that's insane. That's actually insane, and it doesn't feel insane to me. So, the power of hearing yourself speak, I think is wonderful. So kind of that honesty or transparency. And then there's a whole slew of resources. So there's recovery communities like Alcoholics Anonymous, which are completely free. Anybody can go, but at the same time, I'm going to play both sides. It's very scary for a lot of people to just say, hey, I'm going to walk into one of these meetings. So I understand all the reasons why people don't necessarily reach out, and they tell themselves, it's not that bad. It's okay. I'll stop tomorrow. It's Monday. I'll restart. Even for drug addiction, there's any anonymous you can imagine. There's Codependence Anonymous, Food Addicts Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous. And then there's...
What about resources for like the families of an addict?
Yeah. So I think that's where you see the most devastating effects. So what often happens so my first suggestion is say there's destruction happening in the home. Say someone's highly addicted and there's just chaos going on. The first step is the removal of the person that needs help. So that's why treatment centers exist. So there's public and private treatment centers available. Some people leave the country to go to treatment. Again, I'm speaking from a place where people have to have privilege. They have to have the money to go through there. And it's devastating, right? Because then you look at the centers that are publicly funded. There's probably one English one in Montreal that's basically shut down through COVID, and the waiting list is very long.
Awful.
So being able to have because what happens with the families is that the family is going to always try to help. We're going to be the ones to save them. I'm going to, and then you start crossing that line into enabling, right? There's oftentimes there's a hero in a family. I'm going to be the one, they keep giving them money. I've seen, family members, they'll hire them at the family company because I'm watching them now. It'll be okay. And I'm like, stop doing these things. You know what I mean? The one thing, and it's the hardest thing to do as a parent.
It's tricky too, because a lot of the time addiction comes with mental illness. And so it's like, the hardships that are going to be coming the way of your family member who is now cut off.
For sure.
Like, how do you even navigate that? And a lot of the treatment centers that I've heard of are very specific. It's like, you have to be sober. Like anyways, I don't find there's enough resources
a lot of barriers
at all.
A lot of barriers. But yeah, you're absolutely right with the families. And the tricky thing is that the family becomes distraught, right? So they're in crisis. And when we're in crisis, what happens? We want a quick fix. We want the solution now. So we call this center or this center, not knowing, right? It's not like we're prepared to know where to send loved ones. And just like you said, cutting a child off. And when I say child, I mean up until, I've seen parents in their 70s coming to family support groups to support their child who's in their 50s, right? So this horrible notion of like arrested development, right? Where you don't progress in your life, and the parents want to hold on so tight, and I don't think that they mean to maliciously, but they just can't cut the cord because they think, if I stop providing, if I stop giving them a roof over their head, even though they're stealing from me, if I stop giving them a job, they're going to be out on the streets, they might die, they might this. And enabling is one of the highest forms of abuse that I know. It's just tricky because it doesn't look like abuse, but it is. It's probably the number one thing that I tell parents to stop doing. It's the process of removing things from the person, not continuing to give, because you really only realize that you have a problem when you run out of solutions. So if I kept calling you every week, can I have $100? Can I have $100? Can I sleep at your house? Can I have $100? Well, I don't need to go to rehab. I got $100 and a nice warm house to sleep in. So it's oftentimes, like you've mentioned motivation before. I don't think I've seen motivation, anybody come in, unless they've been really kind of beaten and broken down. It's mostly coercion or, being forced in, essentially, because there's nowhere else to go. And that's great, because until every bridge is burned, essentially, do we surrender? Yeah.
And so is the process or the thought on that that the worst case scenario is better than the current state, or like, I don't know.
What do you mean by best case scenario?
Like you mentioned, like, oh, they'll end up in jail, on the streets, or may die. Like, how could a parent live with themselves after that? Like, it's like, how do you help people find peace in like calming those thoughts? Is it because science or in like through therapy or through wherever that through your courses, where it's like it doesn't end up to that? Usually there's a rock bottom and then they seek out help, or what is how do you help people navigate that?
It goes back to your original question of what do the families do? And it's a very insidious disease, right? A lot of times people do end up passing away. A lot of times they don't end up getting the help. Some clients have chosen to stay on the street after 3 months of therapy. I've watched people leave 3 months of treatment and use that afternoon, right? So what happens is that a separation needs to happen. The parents need to continue to heal despite the choices of their child, which, has to be one of the most difficult things to do. But there are support groups, right? So like I had mentioned, fellowships like Alcoholics Anonymous, there's actually a whole separate fellowship called Al-Anon for family members or spouses of alcoholics, drug addicts. And I've heard wonderful things, a lot of community support, a lot of separation. How do I continue to move on knowing that this is happening? Because that will drive a person crazy to constantly. And that's really when you started to hear about codependency and the inability to have two, interdependent lives. That's only dependence on one another. I can only be okay if you're okay, and vice versa. And that's dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe that would be a good segue into codependency. I think, was that the definition?
I think there's lots of definitions, but yes, it is basically the urgency to control another's behavior, even if you think it's in a very positive way, right? It used to be, I think, an author named Melody Beattie kind of birthed the idea of codependency in the 80s, based on the wives and husbands of alcoholics. So she kind of noticed that these behaviors, oh, he or she is home drunk on the couch again. I do everything around here. I do the cooking. I do the cleaning. And they end up staying with this partner despite their behavior because of their own either upbringing, trauma, subconscious ideas of that savior complex. But now there's been so many new avenues when it comes to codependency that you know, and I get that question a lot. People say, I'm not in a relationship, or I'm not married to somebody who's struggling with addiction or alcoholism. Can I be codependent? Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
Okay. And what would that look like?
Codependency can look like a lot of things. So oftentimes it does emerge in your romantic relationships, is normally what I've observed, is when people start to see it. So we'll use that as a first example. So the idea of one of the major markers is this idea of self-abandonment that I talk about a lot. So now my needs don't matter, and I'm going to hyperfixate on what I think that you need, or what I think you need me to be. So this idea of almost chameleoning into a version that I've assumed that you want me to be. So really just, this hyper focus,
completely
100%,
losing yourself.
To the point where I've seen people feel completely out of their minds, neurotic, just so obsessed with what the other person is doing, thinking, feeling. Why didn't they call it this time? Are they pulling away? And really, I mean, codependency is just a nice blanket term now that we use. You hear it everywhere, but underneath those kind of 40 trap doors go back to the attachment wounds as a child. Yeah.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question was, what do you think the root of codependency is?
I'm a firm believer, and I use an attachment lens for with a lot of my clients. So just in a nutshell, without opening too many, it's going to be a 7-hour podcast. There's essentially, without getting into the mixes of attachment wounds, there's secure attachment, anxious attachment, and an avoidant attachment. So going back to your original question of somebody who just feels like, happy day to day, they've grown up, nice household. They're not hyper vigilant as a kid. There's not a lot of chaos. Maybe they meet their college sweetheart and life is stable. That will be a securely attached person.
Yeah.
An anxiously attached person is normally, I'd say, 95% of the clients that I work with have an anxious attachment style. So that's really when you start to see the panic come up. And even scarier, normally an anxiously attached person will often be attracted to an avoidantly attached person because it will remind them of either mom or dad. So it goes pretty deep. But essentially, what happens is, from birth to about 8 years old, if you're not given the support that a baby or a child needs, if you don't feel safe in your environment and you learn to start to take care of mom and dad's emotions, maybe there's an alcoholic or a narcissist in the home, there's yelling, there's violence, a child does not learn how to feel safe, and they can't self-soothe. And when you can't self-soothe as a child, or nobody's there to soothe you as a child, it's very hard to soothe yourself as an adult. And that's where you start to see addictions, food addiction, codependency, sex, pornography, overspending. It feels nice and soothing. And what happens is it's almost at a very, very deep level. People try to recreate old situations And yeah, so when they get into these romantic relationships, like even personally, I had to take a step back and I'm like, oh my God, like I keep dating dad. I keep dating mom. Like it's the same personality. And I had no idea that I was doing it until it was explained to me that at a deep level that if I can get this person to not be avoidant and to open up and to love me and to comfort me, all will be okay. And what I couldn't get in the past, I'll get now. And I will be okay. That's the fixation. It's the fantasy of I'm going to change this personality type. And then once I change it, not only am I okay, like it's a boost of confidence. It's, you know, taking somebody maybe with low self-worth or low self-esteem and saying, wow, you know, this person who stayed the same their entire lives has now finally changed just for me.
And I feel like that's just never the outcome.
It's never, you know, and it's devastating because you don't realize you're doing it when you're in it. You know, it often takes, just like rehab requires an emotional or physical bottom, codependency does too. I often talk to my clients about this. I know people who won't work with individuals if they're in the loop of the relationship, because it's almost like you're using at that point. You're so manic and you're so obsessed with the other that it's really hard to do the work at the time. I don't take as an aggressive approach. I believe that people need to go through what they need to go through to learn the lessons, and they can be supported along the way. But it is, I would say it's comparable to a drug addiction or alcoholism. The obsession, the fantasy, the inability to just relax, right? They're going back to that point of interdependence. There is no interdependence, completely dependent. All of your actions and moods, decisions are now based on someone else. So that is the long form of the answer. Yeah.
Yeah. I had a therapist once who said that expecting your partner to reach all of your needs is childish. And she was like, your mom and dad, like they tell you like, go pee because like in an hour from now, you're going to have to go, or have a snack now because you're going to be hungry once we start that road trip, or da-da-da. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like that's like mind blowing. It made me feel stupid, but it's like, it's so, when you put it in those words, so accurate.
And sorry.
And well, I just, another thought that I had based on like personal experience too, is that I had to kind of retrain my mind on what a healthy relationship was. Because I felt like when like there was the ups and downs, that was like excitement, and that was the butterflies, and that was like the testament that I'm so in love. And it was like retraining that no, that is unhealthy. There should be there shouldn't be volatility.
Such a great point. That's a great point, especially for people who are recovering alcoholics or addicts, right? That is the ultimate feeling, like, ooh, there's that old feeling again. There's that old hit of dopamine. Yeah, and I tell people run in the other direction. If somebody is producing that feeling for you, it is an attachment wound coming up. That is an old interaction that needs to be looked at and healed. And this person is now just mirroring that for you, you know? So that's an excellent point.
So what does a healthy relationship
look like
with someone
else? I think, I think gone are the days right now of friendship. You know, with online dating, with everything is just so, you know, you can have anything dropped off at your door in a matter of seconds. It's actually really spooky. I had someone tell me during COVID that they ordered movie theater popcorn to their...
My sister does that.
She does that. It was the strangest thing that I've ever heard in my time. I'm like, you had a large bag of hot, salty movie theater popcorn at your door? First of all, how much does that cost? And second of all...
And side note, at this time she was living 5 minutes away from the movie theater. Just didn't want to drive herself.
It all very much freaks me out, you know. And that in itself is a problem, right? We're on these screens, you know, we're constantly on Zoom or whatever it is, and we're swiping, right? We're swiping and we're looking at pictures and maybe a small bio. which is fine. I mean, if that's the method that people have busy lives, and there's nothing wrong with online dating, but what is wrong is dumping all of your eggs in one basket, right? So the idea of meeting someone, especially if there's a history of codependence, and I'm speaking from many years of personal experience, is, okay, you seem good. You seem all right. This went well, this went well. Or, like completely waiting to see if they liked you. And I often ask clients, I'm like, did you like them? did you, yeah.
I didn't think
at all. Did you interview them? Are they aligned with your values? Do your family lives match? Do you enjoy, and you're never going to get a 10 on 10 match, but it's really about, are you self-abandoning any parts of you to be liked? And it's not about kind of going into date one and trauma dumping or saying your whole story. But I think the marker of a healthy relationship is I always, especially when I'm working with clients that have a history of codependency, is stay friends. Because when you're friends, you can breathe and you can be yourself. And if you stay friends for 3 to 6 months, you're going to learn a lot about the person. A lot. And if you, and if you've already slept together, or if you've jumped into a relationship, maybe you don't feel like you can be as transparent, or you might be putting on this show. Like I was the queen of putting on this act, right? Like I was amazing for like 2 months. I was like the best partner ever for 2 months. And then honestly, watch out what starts to come out of my mouth, because I wasn't honest from the beginning. I wasn't okay with some of the things that I saw. I wasn't in line with this, right? And what does that do? That builds resentment inside. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would think number one dating tip is, can you be friends? Do you want to be friends with this person? Do you want this person? One of the biggest markers for me was with people that I shouldn't have been with. I didn't want them around my friends. We had nothing, like it was always like this secret kind of like, okay, we could chill at home, especially through COVID, right? A lot of people just kind of shacked up and built this like solitude together.
So
and it's like, that's great. I'm happy you had company, but what happens now? Can you bring them out? Can you, and that was a huge one for me, where it's like, oh boy, these are, and I value my friendships. I love my friends. I have a ton of friends, and it's important. I see them a lot. So it's important to be with someone that I feel can come out with them. So yeah, I think friendship is,
and they, like you said, usually the people around you know something's wrong before you do.
Always. My friends are the best for that. They're like, my friends have been like the biggest kind, and they'll know, they'll sense it. They'll sense it from how I pull away, from how I'm speaking about the person, the things I'm justifying, things that I said I would never be okay with, just certain qualities of a person. They're like, hello. And I'm like, yeah, but it's going to be okay. And and another kind of guideline, that I need to say out loud so that I listen to it too, is give yourself 3 months. And if you feel like there's a lot of things going wrong and you're not okay with at 3 months, duck out. Because
and what can those things be? Like, what are, I don't want to just say red flags, but like red flags for you, or that you tell clients? Like,
I think red flags can be very subjective. So I actually have my clients talk to me about what they're noticing, because something that might be okay with me might really not be okay with you because of whatever reason. But I always encourage people to trust yourself, right? If you feel like something's off, something's off. But that's very hard too, right? Like if we got into a whole other podcast on gaslighting, people who have been gaslit their whole life, including myself, they learn not to trust themselves. I would always state things out loud and be told that's not happening. That's not true, right? So then all of a sudden, when I start to notice things as an adult, I'm like, oh, it can't be. It can't be. I'm probably just crazy. I'm probably just seeing something that's not really there. So there's a lot underneath that one, but
I think like even if you weren't raised in a home where you were being gaslit, or like friends, wherever it was coming from, I think just being a woman, it's like you're told like, calm your pretty little head, you're crazy, it's in your head. Like that's what pulled me so much to women's health, is that everything tells you to distrust yourself and dislike yourself. And yeah, I think there's a lot of healing
even like yourself, some of your posts, even on a physical aspect, like pain is normal. How many times I've told myself pain is normal until I got into my 30s. I'm like, I don't think this is normal. Why have I told myself that this is so okay and acceptable? Just be quiet. It'll, you know what I mean? So going back to flags, I think one of the basic ones that I hear a lot of the time is, you know, I don't know if she's as interested, or I don't know if he's as interested as I am. Okay, tell me more about that. What does that look like? What level of effort are you putting in versus the other person? So that's a big one, right? If you feel like somebody's not that interested, they're probably not that interested. It can also, but when you're emotionally invested, that's very hard to see, right? Yeah. Somebody who's not emotionally attached can see that quite well. Lies, you know, he or she said this, or confusion. I feel really confused by what they said. You know, I always say the truth is the truth. The truth is simple, right? Things should be simple. Transparency is simple. So when I have to jump through like 40 hoops to understand what you're saying, you might just, very well be confused because the person is a bit confusing. So yeah, I see a lot of kind of level of effort, you know, maybe not being aligned necessarily. I think a lot of the times people can feel fearful of saying what they want, you know, where they want to go. I often tell people, like, if you just feel like sleeping around, which is totally fine, don't date someone who's looking for like a full-blown monogamous, you know, potential marriage relationship. It's just not fair. That's not what they want, you know? So I actually appreciate people. I've told multiple people this, when people have their profiles online, you know, just looking for sex. Perfect. Good for you, because it's very clear. It's very honest, right? But it's very honest, but it would also prevent, hopefully, maybe not, it would hopefully prevent someone who is looking for something a little bit more serious to not swipe right on that. Which I'm sure some people do, and say, "Oh, I'm going to be the one to change them. That's the best one. You know, they'll change it for me." Yeah.
Okay, and then obviously people are coming to you to help them either when they're in relationships, or help prevent repeating patterns in the next one. So, what are kind of strategies that you recommend for people who struggle with codependency or anxious attachment?
So a strategy, I think one of the best, and it normally takes kind of like a few sessions, really, like we have to think about the levels of awareness, right? Where someone is. So say they're currently in a relationship, I would start from a very different place than if somebody's just hit a really deep emotional bottom and a huge breakup, right? Because the things that you're able to look at that point might be different, because if you're in a codependent relationship, you're still hyper-focused on the other person. So there's going to be a lot of scaling back. So I work a lot with boundaries, right? So essentially imagining this invisible fence around me that's preventing you from coming in and me from going into your fence, right? Because I think a lot of people struggling with codependency often feel like they're the ones who are being, you know, walked on, mistreated. But I challenge them often too, because there's a lot of manipulation and people pleasing, right? You know, I really want this person. I really want to pretend I'm this person to get you to like me. And then I'm like, okay, who's that serving in the moment? Yourself, you know? So, but say we were working with somebody in a very anxious state. The best piece of advice would not be to hound your partner at that point. So to actually realize, okay, there's a lot of anxiety coming up right now. I think it's because of him or her, but instead, so they actually call it protest behavior. So in the past, if I've been with somebody avoidant and they said, I don't want to talk to you till tomorrow. Poof. see, I'm like a one-way ticket to, you know what I mean? Like I would berate the person and call and text. And I'd write this manipulative paragraph. I just need to talk. I just need to talk. Right. That behavior. Yeah. So that would be protest behavior. So I'm in the past often hearing something different than what's actually happening. So the best thing to do, I mean, people really don't know how to self-soothe in that moment, especially if you're just beginning the work. But I would say talk to anybody else in that moment, or do an activity that involves like your mind and your hands. So go fold some laundry, go for a walk and put on a podcast. Just allow that boiling pot to come down, because that is an old story that's coming up for you. And no matter what, your partner, whether it's an appropriate partner for you or not, they're not going to be the ones to fix. They're not even going to know what to say to you right now, because that trauma that's coming up is not theirs. And people who haven't gone through the same thing, or even worse, avoidance, they don't want to talk. They turtle, they shut down. So when you go after someone who's shut down, it's oil and water. It's oil and water. So I think the first thing would be to learn how to reach out somewhere else, or let yourself calm down. A good one is the 24-hour rule. Do not act on what you're feeling for 24 hours, because you will notice a huge difference from the initial attack to how you feel the next day.
Okay. That's really interesting. Do you think it's possible for people who are in a codependent relationship to, like, and they both acknowledge it and want to put in the work? Like, is that something that is like possible through therapy, through consulting you, or should it be something that's not going on? Or
I definitely feel, I'm a firm believer, if both parties are aware and doing the work for the right reasons, 100% it could work out. I think it would be, you know, obviously more difficult if, you know, it's helpful if maybe there's one more securely attached person in the relationship. But no, I'm a firm believer. I'm a firm believer if you're doing the work for yourself. It gets dangerous if I'm going to therapy for you. I hear that from a lot of people. Okay, I'll go for him. I'll go for her. So the intention is not to change for yourself, but if you take two parties who are used to trying to heal each other by trauma bonding, if all of a sudden they have this awakening and they say, there's so many things I love about you, I want to stay with you long term, I understand and observe that there's a lot of codependence coming up, you go heal separately, I'll go heal separately. And I often tell people too, take a break. There's nothing wrong with taking a break. You know, I think people are so scared of breaks. Take a break, hit the pause button. And if both people at the same time are doing, you know, relatively close level of healing, absolutely. I think it's miraculous the things that people can do when they want to put in the effort to change or to grow. Or I don't believe anybody is doomed, myself included.
So just to kind of wrap things up, where could, other than obviously reaching out to you, working with you, do you have any books that you recommend about codependency or attachment styles?
Yeah. So I mentioned the author Melody Beattie earlier. So that was like the #1 book that came out. I think it was mid-'80s. She's written a revised version. I've read it. It wasn't too different from the first, so don't worry about which version you get. But it's called Codependent No More. I think that would be a very helpful initial place to start, to get a very simplified, clear understanding of attachment styles. The book is actually titled Attached. I can't tell you the author at the top of my head. It's a white cover with red writing. Very simplistic, breaks down each style so you can kind of recognize some of the traits. And then I would say the queen of codependency for me is a woman named Pia Melody. So Pia. She actually runs a codependency. It's almost like an intensive. It's at a treatment center, I think in Utah. So she's written Facing Codependence, Pacing Codependence. They all have codependence in the title, but if you research Pia Melody, she's incredible. And we're very lucky. I think you have to be careful of who you're listening to and who you're following. But I mean, Instagram, Facebook, there's so many therapists on there now. So I would encourage people search for a licensed therapist, especially in the States. You'll see like LPC. So there'll be a licensed practicing counselor in their state. There's a woman, I don't know, I can't remember her first name, but her handle is the Attachment Nerd on Instagram. She's brilliant. She actually talks a lot about children as well. Because one major thing is also not to repeat the patterns now with your children. So that's a huge part of all of this. So she really goes into that. But yeah, those would be my top suggestions right now. Yeah.
Okay, great. And if somebody wants to work with you, what's the best way to reach you?
I'm all over social media all the time. Jess Phillips Coaching is my handle on Instagram and Facebook. And my website is the same, www.jessphillipscoaching.com. You can submit a private inquiry form. Just let me know some of the things that are going on. And we can set something up. I always offer phone calls. I want to make sure I'm a proper fit for people. So I always like to kind of chat, see where everybody's at first. And good thing about being in this field is if I can't help you, I know a ton of people who can. So yeah,
that's great. I didn't mention this in the intro, but you do work in Montreal, and are your consults in person or virtual?
I actually do both. So I would say 85% virtually right now. I think it's just become quite comfortable for people. But I also work at a clinic in Lachine. So for people who prefer to be face-to-face, they would become clients of the clinic, and then I would see them there. So yeah, I do both.
What clinic is that?
Yeah. They have a wonderful team there too, a couples therapist. They do a lot of anger management, trauma, somatic therapy. So a really cool group of people. And also too, a great way to say like, oh, okay, you're struggling with this. Maybe this person will be of more benefit to you. So yeah, but being able to do both has been great. So.
And do you ever work with couples?
Eventually I would like to. So you mentioned at the beginning that, so I just finished school to become a licensed psychotherapist. So now I do my 400 hours of supervision. And there's actually a brilliant couples therapist at the clinic. So I'll be working closely with him as well. So in the future, I think I would like to head that way. Right now, I technically can't because say an individual person, and I get asked this question a lot, say somebody comes, does a few sessions with me and then says, okay, now can I bring my partner? I can't do that now, right? Because there's so much information on one side. But yeah, eventually I'm really fascinated by family systems. So really breaking down that family of origin, what happened, why you're attracted to this partner, what the dynamics are. So right now, no, in the future, hopefully.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. I feel like I learned so much today, and I'm really grateful.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we'll have to come back if you're open to it another time, because we didn't get to deep dive into food addiction, but I would love to do that.
I never run out of things to say. Anytime. Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks again. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Take care. Bye.
Okay, bye.